Well, there's the heaviness of damage being caused, and in the second verse, think about fluttering sparrow. You have birds flying around. Fluttering sparrows or darting swallows. There's nothing about them landing and roosting. They're just flying around. So in Semitic languages, there's also the understanding this word kalal means flighty. So there's an interesting play in words in the poetry that you've got these birds flying around. They're light, which is the actual meaning in Hebrew, but it also could mean flighty. Okay, so you're comparing that with weight and lightness or flightiness. So an undeserved curse doesn't come to rest. And the idea is if a fool is cursing you and you don't deserve it, it's just going to fly around. It's never going to land on you. You don't have to worry about it. And I think about another proverb in English, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We have our own proverb that kind of conveys that same message. People can say all kinds of bad things about us, but if it's not true, it's not going to land on us. It's not going to hurt our reputation. Okay, moving on to verse 3. A whip for the horse, a halter for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. Once we get to verse 3, we're coming to the end of our introduction. Verses 1 through 3 are the introductions of this section. And I start to see a pattern. If you look at the first line of each of those 3 verses, the first line is talking about created things. Snow in the summer, rain in the harvest. Verse 2, a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow. Verse 3, a horse or a donkey. Now the second line of each one of those verses is talking about, now that's the created order, the first line. The second line is the social order. So we're looking at relationships. Honor isn't fitting for a fool. An undeserved curse doesn't come to rest. Or a rod, and it means discipline, is for the back of fools. So we're comparing the created order with the social order. It's another parallelism in those 3 verses. And it causes those 3 verses, because of that, they relate to each other, and it's looked at as a group. Now, what do we learn about them? Not only is honor not fitting for a fool, it can cause, in fact, damage. Not only do we learn that a curse that's undeserved is not going to rest on us, we're not going to be labeled with that, but also, like a whip for a horse, when you think about what a whip's used for, it's oftentimes used to prod a horse to hurry up. And think about what a bridle does, or halter. A bridle and halter, you have the bit that goes in the mouth, and that actually can hurt, and when it's pulled, it causes the donkey to pay attention. And then also, if there's a whole halter or a bridle, there's a lot of times those eye flaps, it forces that donkey to look straight ahead. So the rider has much better control with the bit and the halter, and the donkey needs to be controlled. So you've got the prodding, and you've got the control, and that's quite a lot of work that's needed for a person against the weight of a donkey or a horse. That's how a person who weighs so much less and so much less strong than those animals can control that animal. Same thing, compare that to the back of a fool. That's what a rod is being compared to, a back of a fool. A rod is needed to correct the foolishness of a fool. Okay, so there is the introduction. Next section, verses 4 and 5. Does this sound familiar? I think I mentioned it last week as we were talking about Proverbs, and we were talking about how sometimes Proverbs even seem to contradict themselves. Here are 2 right next to each other. Don't answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll be like him yourself. Or answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Okay, what am I supposed to do? Right? And the wise person is discerning, needs to be discerning about which of those things you do in the instance that you're in. If you're talking to a fool, you have to discern, does this fool need me to not answer him like he's talking, or does this fool need me to answer him like he's talking? The first one, don't answer a fool according to his folly. If you do, you might end up losing your temper, behaving rudely, or speaking slanderously. So we never want to do that. We don't want to sin as we're responding to a fool. Now the second one, you also need to, like the rod for a back of fools, you need to not let fools get away with what they're doing, because they could harm people. So then you might need to reprove him and rebuke him. So sometimes you need to be careful what you say, and sometimes you need to be very intentional about what you say. You have to use wisdom. And the idea behind that is what we're learning in this study of Proverbs, is that we need to be in the Word, knowing what it says, so that we have it in us when the time comes up, that we have to discern, okay, which one do I do here? And if we have the Word in us, we have to trust the Holy Spirit will give us now we're moving into the next section. I'm going to give you a little visual. You won't be able to see this, but you've got on your sheet, you can just make the drawings as we're talking through it. Now, the section we've just talked about, the first section we were talking about animals. Okay? Now we get to this section, sections 6 through 10, and we're talking about people. So we're moving a little bit more intricately into the description of fools, into the people realm. But notice the descriptions. If you really read this, okay, like cutting one's feet, or drinking violence, like a lame man's legs that hang limp. I mean, it's really weird descriptions, but they're memorable. You know, if we think about Proverbs, these things really stick in our mind. So what do we learn about it? The major point is we want to remember that we're learning about honor. And in this section, we find the word honor right in the middle. And it's interesting that it's in the middle. And people that are used to studying poetry tend to look for this structure pattern. And there's a structure pattern that's called a chiasm. And this is a chiasm. And the reason that there's a structure called chiasm is that it points to the key part of this section. And it's interesting that the key part of the section refers back to verse number 1. Honor is not fitting to a fool, so is honor to a fool. So there's something important about this section that gives us specific information about honor being fitting for a fool. Now, chiasm, the structure of that is that the outside verses relate to each other, and the second ones relate to each other, and that leaves this one in the middle as one to focus on, as the core. Okay, that's a chiastic structure. Here's the word chi. It's C-H-I-A-S-T-I-C, chiastic, or chiasm. So, what do we learn about that? Like cutting one's feet off or drinking violence is the sending of a message by the hand of the fool. Here we're hiring a fool, like an archer who wounds. Where is it? Our archer who wounds at random is he who hires a fool or a passerby. Both of those, even though they're not exactly the same, are talking about committing important business to a fool. We give the fool the ability to send a message, and we hire a fool to do some work for us. Okay? Now here, in the second verses, they're related to each other. You see it right here. Proverb in the mouth of the fool. Okay? So, think about teaching fools proverbs doesn't do any good if they're foolish. They can know a lot of words, but if they never apply it to their life, remember we were talking about the fool is prideful, they think that they know everything. So even if they know the words here, if they're not willing to have it change their life, it's not going to do any good. So even though they might be able to say the proverb, it doesn't change who they are, they're still a fool. So it's like a lame man's legs hanging limp. They don't do any good. If he's lame, it doesn't matter if he has legs hanging there. Same thing with a thorn in the drunk man's hand. Think about it. A thorn bush. If a drunk man had a thorn bush, if he's wobbly and wandering around, that in his hand could really damage other people. He could run into somebody, could damage himself. It's not a good thing. So it's like that. It's damaging or not a good thing in his mouth. And then all of these then point to this one, which is the center point. Tying a stone in a sling. Think about a sling. And when you throw a sling and throw it, that stone is meant to go. So is honor. It's meant to be thrown away from the fool. You don't want to have honor land on a fool and have it stick to him. Okay? So here's some poetic imagery to teach us some concepts about fools and foolishness. Then the last section, the last two verses, 11 and 12. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Okay, again, we look at the concept of foolishness. If you think about dog, if you've ever had a dog, you've seen them do this. They go back to their vomit. They don't know not to do that. A fool who commits foolishness, they think